When Rebecca and I were first married, we got that first apartment in Bolivar, Missouri. And I got to tell you, the rent was like $300. It was amazing. But you've ever heard that phrase, you get what you pay for? That's exactly what we got. It was about $300 worth of living space. There was sort of a loft area that had like half a bedroom. Then downstairs there was a living space, with a TV, kind of, not very wide, not very long. The kitchen was super tiny. I think there was a stove in there. I'm not sure. The counter space, Rebecca reminded me, was like this, and she wasn't kidding. And then in the back room there was like sort of a office space, a tiny little office space, which led to the backyard, if you call it, and the outhouse that was out. I'm just kidding. There was no outhouse. I just want to see if you were paying attention. There was a bathroom, kind of, inside. Uh, it was good. When we were first married, we didn't really need a ton of space. There was only two of us, and so it worked for us. We were living at that time paycheck to paycheck. It's how we survived. And every once in a while, we found an extra $5. Don't ask me where that $5 came from, but every once in a while, every few months or so, $5 would appear somewhere, and we would use that $5 to go to Domino's, and that was our night out. It was huge. Now at Domino's at that time, you could get like a medium one-topping pizza. Don't ask for more toppings because you're not going to get that with $5. I was surprised the thing came with cheese, but it did. We would bring it back to the house. We would eat the whole thing and watch, God bless those metabolism in that time. You could just do that, and it was fine. We would watch a movie. Who am I kidding? We would watch whatever was on 4, 5, or 9 at the time because that's what we could afford. But in the moment, we didn't feel like we were missing out on anything. Life was good. We were newlyweds. Things were going great. We had a roof over our head. We didn't have a mortgage payment. We didn't have a car payment. We didn't have to provide for more than 2 people. Life has changed since then quite a bit. And some of you are all laughing. And it seems that as more life changes, more in great and wonderful ways, the more responsibility and weight starts piling on. And that freedom and that lightness we once felt changes to all things we have to do in order to keep the world, our tiny part of it, spinning, and making sure that 2 kids are fed and clothed and have all the things that they need. Have you felt that journey before? Have you felt that journey? Okay, I'm not the only one. Let's go to Scripture for just a few moments. In Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19, Jesus says this: "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And jumping to verse 24, he says, "No one can serve 2 masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Our passage this morning comes from the Sermon on the Mount. Now, it's an unusual sermon. It's more of like a collected works, or if you want to think of it in musical terms, it's like the best hits of Jesus, and sort of all the things that he taught and shared in his ministry in Galilee and the surrounding areas. He is collected here in the Sermon on the Mount. There's not a real narrative flow. In fact, if you read the whole thing, which I'm sure you'll go home after this sermon and do, not go watch a football game, you'll just read the Sermon on the Mount, you will see that there's not a real narrative flow to it. It's just Jesus sort of lining out all these important things for what does it mean to be a person of faith, and how we should live our life, and how we interact with one another, and what we're called to do as a community of faith. In this section, Jesus takes a few moments to talk about wealth or material possessions, about money. Jesus says, "Store up for yourself treasures in heaven," because those treasures do not fade over time as opposed to the treasures here on earth. And if we read that text on the surface level, it might seem that if we just do good and righteous things here on earth, we're somehow socking away some sort of investment that will pay off dividends in the afterlife. And that when we get there to the afterlife, we'll see how good we were compared to our neighbors because they'll have a pile of heavenly riches. And we'll be able to judge that. But that doesn't really seem like Jesus. If you want to look for a consistent message and see what Jesus really teaches and preaches throughout his entire ministry, you'll see that Jesus puts a lot of emphasis not on the hereafter, not on the sweet by and by, but what's going on right here on earth. Think about it. All those passages we lift up. Love your neighbor as yourself, or clothe those who are naked, feed those who are hungry, visit those who are in prison. All these passages that we come to time and time again, they all have to do with things that are happening right here, right now. I doubt that Jesus is talking about storing up some sort of heavenly treasure so that we can enjoy some sort of nest egg once we die. But rather, what Jesus is saying, when we treasure something, our focus is there. When we value something, we put our attention there. Perhaps what Jesus is saying, put your focus, your attention on heavenly things, on God, on the things that God wants us to do here on earth. For where our treasure is, there is our heart. When we focus on these things, we begin to live a certain way. If we concentrate on God's love, we will love more and more here on earth. And our reality, our existence here will begin to change, conforming more and more to that of the heavenly kingdom. Jesus puts a lot of emphasis on what we're to do here. And in this section, he talks about who we're called to serve. Do we serve God or material possessions? Do we serve God, or the Aramaic word is mammon? Mammon is just a word that means wealth or riches. For the next few weeks, we're going to journey together exploring anxiety and stress as a sermon series. Why? Because I've noticed more and more in my own life, and I've heard from more and more of you, the anxiety and stress that begins to build and the things that weigh us down are growing at an exponential rate. At our Thursday night service, the table down at the Whistle Stop coffee shop, we've been talking about joy, the Book of Joy. It's a book written by Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And in this book, they talk about those things that bring us joy. And they talk about finances and money in their book as well. Bishop Desmond Tutu recognizes that we have this sort of desire to keep up with the Joneses. But not just keep up with our neighbors. We look around us and see what they have. We want to exceed them. I think this point is illustrated best by one of the greatest British theologians of our time, and that is Mr. Bean. Do you know Mr. Bean? If you don't, go watch Mr. Bean after this sermon. Ignore the Super Bowl. I'm just kidding. Mr. Bean is sitting there in class. He's getting ready to take a test, and he has a table mate. It's a long table. He's sitting over here. Mr. Bean is sitting over here. And his table mate begins to pull out a pen, place it neatly on the table, and he gives a smug look at Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean then pulls out a pen, and places it on the table. And they're fine for just a few seconds. Then all of a sudden his table mate pulls out a second pen, puts it on the table, gives a smug look to Mr. Bean. Mr. Bean does the same thing. Then Mr. Bean goes for a third pen, pulls it out on the table, places it down, looks at his table mate, but his table mate is all out of pens. But Mr. Bean's not done. Mr. Bean goes again, and out a giant wad of pens from his briefcase, lays them down, and looks at his table mate like, and this is what we do. we enter into this idea of competition with one another. We see our neighbor has something, and we want to prove that we are just as worthy, we are just as good, that we have just as much as our neighbor. And we'll do all kinds of things to prove it. We'll go to excess to make the point. Bishop Desmond Tutu mentions that this is that religious word we've thrown around, envy, before. We've seen it come up in the biblical text before, and we've heard about the 7 deadly sins, envy being one of them. The dialogue describes this as, envy, when we look at those who we think are somehow above us for whatever reason, maybe their socioeconomic status, the car they drive, the house they own. We look in competitiveness with those that are equal to us or that we see as our equal, our neighbor. And then we actually despise those who we feel us. We've created this rank and file system, and we feel that these people down here are worth our time. This doesn't really square with the passage or the message that Jesus seems to be trying to share with those people gathered around the Sea of Galilee and trying to share with us today. Are we to despise those who are somehow beneath us? Are we really to enter into competition with our neighbor, or was it love our neighbor? Was it to clothe those who are naked and feed those who are hungry, or was it to say, oh, thank God I'm not like them? In our culture, we don't really practice these things. We live in this world of competitiveness. We live in this world of trying to outdo one another, not just keep up with one another, but to have more and more. And at what cost? At what cost? Whether it's working overtime or whether it's trying to make ends meet, or maybe even beyond that, to enter into a super stressful situation that we can't manage to the detriment of our own health, our own mental well-being. I understand the challenge of trying to make ends meet. I understand the challenge of trying to figure out how we're going to plan for the future and what we hope it is to be. But we have to strike a balance as people of faith. Where is our focus, Jesus asks? Is it on God, or is it on accumulating things? I know that I felt the weight before, the financial pressure of all the responsibility. And I'm not saying that we should shirk our responsibility. What I think we should understand is what Jesus is not saying. Jesus doesn't say money is evil. Jesus doesn't say those who have it are terrible people. What Jesus is saying is, look, we need to make sure that our priorities are in order. Are we prioritizing the things of God? Or are we prioritizing accumulating more and more things? We can't serve both, Jesus says. We must make a choice, a hard choice sometimes. And how do we begin to alleviate the stress that we feel, the anxiety of feeling like we don't have enough, or I'm working super hard, I'm working just as hard as this person over here, how come they seem to be succeeding and I'm not? How do we alleviate this anxiety? How do we move forward? This morning I want to share a few things that have helped me, or I've talked with other people and have listened to them that have helped me in my journey of faith and finances. Sometimes we're even afraid to talk about money, especially here at church, but you guys are going to survive. Trust me. The first thing I would encourage you to do is talk to somebody. If you're feeling that anxiety build up over whatever, it doesn't have to be related to finances. It could be anything. Finding that someone or someones that you can go and talk to and be honest with will go a long ways in beginning to relieve that anxiety and stress that you feel. When you're keeping that all to yourself, and I know that this is hard, especially for you introverts in the room, which I am one. You extroverts, you don't mind talking. You're totally cool talking with anyone, and God bless you for it. Us introverts, we're afraid. We're trying to work things out in our own mind, and we think we can handle it. But let me be honest, as an introvert, I need to talk those things out sometimes. It's just too much for me to handle. So finding that person that I can trust, or those persons that I know are going to give me honest feedback, is an important key in the process of relieving some of that stress and anxiety that you're feeling, that we all feel from time to time. In the case of money, maybe it's a peer that you trust, a friend that you know, hey, they seem to be successful managing their finances. Maybe they can guide. Maybe it's going to talk to a financial planner or a financial advisor, somebody who can listen to you and help you develop a plan. Maybe it's talking to a parent. Maybe it's talking to someone else in the field that you can be honest with and really help engage them and engage yourself in developing those tools that are going to help you be successful. Beyond talking, I think another piece, and I've already alluded to it, is planning, especially when it's related to finance, creating a plan. But before you do that, you have to answer a couple questions. The first one, I think, is directly from our text today. What is enough? How much is enough? And this is such a challenging question. Defining what enough is for us, it's individual, I get it. And in our world, in our country, town, it looks different than maybe the next town down the road or the next state or the next country. But you need to answer that question. Maybe with the help of a friend or a parent or somebody that I mentioned earlier. What is enough for you? And second, how can we practice contentment? The two are related. Once you've determined, hey, this is enough. I feel like I've planned for my own safety and the safety and well-being and the future of my children or my loved ones. We've got a good plan in place. How can I live with that plan instead of constantly entering to that mental state of competitiveness and trying to outdo the Joneses and figure out, well, hey, they've got that car. I definitely need this over here. That will balance everything out. That will upgrade my status. And finally, once you've talked with somebody you can trust, once you've developed a plan, whether that's a budget or planning for investment, or whether it's some other framework that's going to help you line out the ways in which you're going to save, spend, maybe eliminate debt, and those kinds of things. The third thing that Desmond Tutu outlines and suggests is giving. Generosity will help alleviate stress and anxiety. I know this sounds counterintuitive, especially if you feel like we are living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe we don't have enough. We haven't answered that question yet. Giving, according to this spiritual leader and others, develops and promotes a sense that, hey, I'm okay, and I'm helping others be okay as well. That together we're taking care of one another. We're giving to those who need a help up, who need a way forward, who, for whatever reason, have gotten in over their heads. And I don't know about you, but I've been there, finding that lifeline. And you could be that person. Absolutely changes the way in which we see the world and the way in which the world works. When we practice generosity, it is contagious. More and more people begin to give and care and respond because they recognize the good that is being done, and they recognize not only that it's some sort of moral responsibility, but that it comes with spiritual benefits as well and creates a sense of wellness. Dalai Lama points to this practice over and over again called mindfulness. Mindfulness is an awareness of who we are, where we are. It's an awareness of what is enough, what isn't. It's an awareness of our community and the needs that we find around. And most of all, it's an awareness of the state of our spiritual health. We are faced with anxiety and stress, and it begins to build. Our spiritual health begins to wane, and we feel sick all over. Finding a way forward means being not only aware of it, but putting in practice some of these things that I've mentioned this morning, or maybe you have other ideas as well, to find a way forward as a community, as an individual, to realize we're called to serve God, to bring compassion. And the more and more we practice this, the more and more we do this, the less the wealth and love. And we find a way to care not only for ourselves, but for our neighbor. Over these next few weeks, we're going to talk about several things that bring us anxiety and stress. And as we do, I recognize that our culture seems chock full of it. I know many of you are stressed about something that is going to happen here in a few hours. And I get it. I'm there. We're sharing that together. But the more and more we recognize that we're not doing this alone, that you're not alone, that you have people that you can talk to, that you have people that will support you. And thank God you have each other. The more and more that anxiety and stress begins to lift, there is hope and there is a way forward. And it's right here in this room. Not only is God's love surrounding you, not only is God's presence there journeying with you, whatever it is that you're facing, you have a whole crew of people that want to journey with you too. My hope and prayer is in these next few weeks together, we can feel our burdens lighten just a little bit, our anxiety lessen just a little bit, find a way forward together. Amen.